Chapter 3. The following day, John stood in his empty classroom. Within a matter of minutes, he would conduct his first group session. In the center of the room, thick wood chairs formed a semicircle. One solo chair faced the rest. The walls were lined with self-affirming posters. I believe. I have been diagnosed with a mental illness. Sources of inner strength will sustain me. People will care for and support me toward recovery. I will let go of things I can't control, set reasonable expectations for myself, forgive others and myself. I choose to rediscover and rebuild myself, to be proud of who I am, to be responsible for my recovery. John sat down and searched through his notes, cramming for direction as his final minutes dwindled. Suddenly, a man in a filthy baseball hat arrived. He sat on the last chair in the semicircle, then scooted it back away from the others. He kept his eyes focused on the floor while rubbing at the scruff of facial hair on his chin. "Hi," John said, just as a few nurses appeared, escorting a male and female patient, as well as Arnie, Mary Jean, and Rebecca. "Welcome," John said to the larger group. Two other men and a woman slipped in without an escort and smiled at him as they took the last available seats. John sat in the seat that faced all 9 patients, some of whom stared back at him. "Welcome," John said again. "For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Dr. John Sanders." A woman dressed in all denim with 2 long braids stood up and walked toward him. John pulled his head back and looked directly at her. "Do you need something?" She walked behind him, then hovered around him. "Please," he kept his voice calm. "Have a seat." "Seat, chair, tabletop, under, above, none for me." "There's an empty spot right there." He pointed at the chair she had come from. "Spot. Oops. Dirt. Cleanser. Clean. Wash. Spot." "That's Fawn," a man with the thin mustache said. "She won't sit down," another woman dressed in a gray tank top and a gray-brimmed hat said. Then she smiled. The man with the filthy baseball cap released a roaring laugh, then stopped. John stood up. "Fawn, will you sit?" "Sit, kid, on it, huff it." In a whisper, John said, "Please." A big man with large eyes stood up. "I'll get her." He picked up Fawn by the shoulders and placed her on the chair. "Now sit." "Ouch, man, big room, small me, stuck." She stood up on her chair and remained quiet. "That's Frank," the man in the mustache said. "He's Fawn's twin brother. Although since he's almost twice her size, you probably couldn't tell. And I'm Maxwell. This is Mary Jean and Dana and—" "That's fine, Maxwell," John interrupted. "I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. Maybe share 1 or 2 things about yourself." "Can I go first?" Maxwell asked. "Sure. I'm Maxwell Bennett Fieldhouse, and I know a lot about schizophrenia. Like, for instance, 1% of the population has it. So really, if you think about it, we're not at all odd. You meet 100 people and one of them is like us. Therefore, we aren't a freak of nature. Not like people think. In fact, we're individuals who have broken out of the ordinary. Our minds have broken through cracks of closed-minded views, and someday future men will look back on this time as the Dark Age, because others have failed to see our creative genius. We're above the norm." "Thank you, Maxwell." John avoided any eye contact. "Who'll go next?" "I'll go," the woman with the gray-brimmed hat said. She had thick glasses and lips that took over her face when she smiled, which she tended to do often. "Okay. I'm Donna, and I'm transitioning to outpatient status in a little over a week." "Yippee!" Her shout was loud, followed by a dominating smile. "Congratulations, Donna. I won't be here at the next meeting. I'm excused. I get to go down and meet my new therapist and see the treatment center. I'll be in a day program for a few months. The whole schedule is planned. Plus, I get a new apartment. I get to take some of my stuff when I go to look at it." She scooted her glasses up while the grin on her face expanded even further. "Wonderful," John mirrored her grin, then turned to the others. "Who's next?" "I'll go," the large man, Frank, said. "I'm not as close as Donna, but not too far either. I'm scheduled to leave in less than 6 weeks." He folded his large arms across his chest and nodded his head in satisfaction. I'm already working on learning the transition steps. Great, Frank. Good for you. The meds are what helped me, and support from doctors, the therapists, you guys. But it's been harder for Fawn. John looked at the sister, who still stood on the chair. Her body had not moved. Do you want to share, Fawn? Know me? Can't. No one knows me. Harder to know me. Holes, show, hate, fear. Scream! Frank translated. She despises anything with holes. Anything that has unorganized random groups of holes. I don't understand, John said. Most people don't, but she despises them. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that phobia. I create them, the man in the tattered baseball hat said. His eyes gleamed with madness. Holes, all for Fawn. He released a rumbling laugh that rolled into a cough. However, the coughing didn't stop. Are you okay? John asked. Need water, the man muttered between coughs. He just wants to get out of group, Maxwell added. He doesn't think he's like us. He says he hates us. Maxwell gave the coughing fit one glance, then looked back at John. He also refuses to accept he's ill. The hacking bursts of air continued. What's his name? John asked. Cameron, Maxwell said. Do you need water, Cameron? Yes, he gasped. John watched as the coughs took over Cameron's body, wondering over his options to get Cameron to a drinking fountain. You don't know what to do with us, do you? Maxwell gave John a concerned look. John looked from Cameron's watering red eyes, which seemed to be looking at him for help, to the eyes of the larger group. Everyone seemed to be staring at him, waiting to see what he'd do. John finally succumbed to his ignorance. What do I do? He asked the group. Donna turned around and pointed. There's a sink right there. John gave a chagrined grin at the small, classroom-style sink in the back corner of the room. He then pointed at it. Go ahead, Cameron. Get what you need. No! A chorus of voices leapt from the group. Frank jumped in. He threw water on all of us last time he used that sink. Cameron's coughing intensified. John scanned the room. Okay. Where's the button to call for nurse assistance? Maxwell shook his head. You really don't know what you're doing, do you? The previous doctor kept a cup locked up in the cupboard just to appease Cameron. Donna said, It's the top cupboard. Maxwell looked disappointed, but nodded at the work area in the back of the room. Then he looked at John's keys attached to his belt loop. One of those opens it. Frank has status to help you if that's what you're going to do. I have status too. Donna smiled at John. I'm just not tall enough to reach the top shelf. John glanced down at his list. An asterisk was next to both Donna and Frank's names. He figured it was a safe risk. He handed the keys to Frank. Do you know which one? Frank took the keys with a frown and stood up. Yes. Come on, Cameron. His large body stomped back toward the sink. After Cameron followed, Maxwell leaned forward and whispered to John. Cameron's an angry guy, always mad. He won't make it through here if he doesn't start making some changes. Thanks, Maxwell. John rubbed his head. After another glance at Frank assisting Cameron, he asked, Who's next? Sitting directly in the center of the semicircle was a man who, from the moment he'd entered the room, had maintained a mischievous smirk. What's your name? John asked. That's Penciltop, Maxwell said. Or Thomas, Dana added, then smiled. Would you like to share, Thomas? John waited, but the only response he got was a grin that grew in intensity. Finally, John asked, Can you tell me why Maxwell calls you Penciltop? Don't ask, Donna warned. But Maxwell proceeded. It's what they found pushed up his nose. Actually, it peeked out, just the top, and it was up real good. Oh. John tried to remain expressionless. He sticks things up any body opening, Maxwell said. One time, they found... That's fine, Maxwell. Maybe Thomas will feel like sharing another time. Let's move on. Mary Jean, we haven't heard from you. The older woman's eyes perked up. Thank you, Doctor. Mary Jean wants to talk. Tell Dr. Sanders all about when the CIA came to visit. All Mary Jean by herself. Said they needed to borrow Mary Jean. That Mary Jean could save the world. Her head jerked sharply to the left. Quiet! Don't tell them nothing. They'll force more out. Mary Jean can talk now, she said as she looked at John. It's all right with Mary Jean. Have to explain why the radio talks in the head. Another jerk to the right. They'll punish you. Who will punish you? John asked. Mary Jean wishes sometimes she could turn off the radio. Not herself, though. She can't control the radio. It's controlled by others. Her kids say they like it. Wish they could hear it too, but just Mary Jean. Only Mary Jean can hear it. Telling Mary Jean what to do. Always just telling Mary Jean. But once the radio was too loud, Mary Jean couldn't hear the other things around. Only the... Mary Jean continued to talk, while Maxwell leaned forward and whispered to John. She's better at having conversations with herself than others. John politely smiled while dividing his attention between Mary Jean and Cameron's game in the back. 3 times Frank had filled up the cup for Cameron, and 3 times Cameron had taken the cup only to dump the water back in the sink, then hand the cup back to Frank, while weakly coughing out the word, more. Finally, Frank gave up. He restored the cup to its cupboard and returned back to the circle, handing over the keys in the process. John accepted the exchange as the appropriate time to intercept the conversation. Thank you, Mary Jean. And thank you, Frank. Cameron, please return to your seat. To John's surprise, Cameron did, only to slouch down, tip his cap over his eyes, and appear as if settling in for a nap. Frank shook his head in disgust. John turned away from Cameron. Now it's Arnie's turn to share. Clean, Arnie said. That's all I want. If I'm not careful, the poison will get me. But if I'm smart, I stay purged. If I can find dentifrice, I'll be alive. No one can 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗓 me. Arnie's delusions are that people are plotting to poison him. Doesn't trust any of us, Maxwell said. I know. John looked at Rebecca. Her eyes were staring at the blanket wrapped in her arms. Would you like to share? She won't, Maxwell said. She doesn't care for any of us either. Just that blue cloth. That's fine, John said. I'll visit everybody individually. I know sometimes it's easier when you're not in a group. Group, loud, alone, not heard, self, solo, here, heart. Fawn slid down into her seat, then looked at the floor. John stared at the woman, her body folding into itself. When he glanced away, Frank caught his eyes. She agrees with you, Frank said. Something in that validation sunk into John's heart, giving him necessary reinforcement. Good, he said softly, then spoke again to the group. I look forward to meeting and talking with all of you. To share a little about me, I'm happy to be here. I'm eager to work together, and just like I want to get to know you, I think it's important that you understand my beliefs about this group. The easiest way for me to explain my philosophy is to compare it to sports. Whenever I can, I like to watch a good game, but no matter what, I always like to root for the underdog, the team that has the least chance of winning. In a way, you're all considered the underdog. Society has put labels on you and has declared how you'll behave. Because of those labels, some of your family or friends might not think you're going to win. Even you might think there's no hope. But I want you to know I have more hope and confidence in you than anyone. Even if the score hasn't been in your favor throughout your life, that doesn't mean you can't still fight for a chance to have a comeback. John ran through his prepared speech until the nurses arrived, along with a recreational technician. One by one, John watched the smiles, frowns, and distant looks of his group as they headed out to their next scheduled activity. An audible sigh escaped. He had survived his first group session at Clearcreek. Barely. Later that day, while he walked down Clearcreek's halls, the motivational speech replayed through John's mind. He had sounded so confident, so convincing, so assured. He had almost believed himself. In truth, he was terrified of the patients, unsure of how he could help them. After years of hoping to do something for those suffering from mental anguish, now he was in their hospital, in their life. He'd been so eager for this day, this opportunity, but perhaps wishing had been more stimulating than truly living this dream. Instead of experiencing joy in this moment, this setting stirred an anxiety from within. It was the halls. They seemed to carry the same maddening cream color from ceiling to floor. No visual break, just the same pale yellow folding in around him. To break away from the continuous color, John looked at the overhead lights and listened to their steady murmur. The small noise, along with the sound of his stride, and somewhere, a beating clock. Everything around him pulled him back, forcing recollections and emotions of his young life to return, making him admit the underlying reason he cared. Although the wounds had long healed, the memory remained a solid root in John's heart. Of course, this hospital was different. The entire environment reflected a changed era, but the setting still pulled at his memories. Perhaps it was the creamed walls, the droning fluorescence, or the echoing footsteps. Whatever the catalyst was, it sent John's mind into the past. 25 years ago, he'd walked down a similar hallway, bright lights hurting his eyes. The corridor was long and enormous. A nurse led the way. John's small legs had tried to match his father's long stride. Fear had him clinging to his father's hand. His father's sturdy hand, the long hallway, the glowing lights, the company of a nurse, all captured in an unchanging moment of time. John entered Rebecca Brownell's room and abandoned his memory. He was no longer a scared, lonely boy in a strange hospital. He was Dr. Sanders, working at the well-respected Clearcreek Mental Care Center. Rebecca's lullaby filled the room. Sleep, little baby, know I am here. I will protect you from danger that's near. So sleep, little one, sleep, sleep on. It was the quiet melody, the tender rocking, the calm setting that affected him. Once again, he was being led, falling back into memories of his childhood. The dark curls swaying on Rebecca's back became blonde strands. Her tiny frame appeared larger, taller, the voice heavier, sadder. And the light bundle, no longer an empty blanket, was his younger sister. In his 5-year-old body, John watched his mother rock his sister to sleep, and he remembered the tears. You're my dear child, Rebecca's lullaby continued. I'll cherish and hold. John squared his shoulders back. What was before him had nothing to do with his past. Still, even with no infant in her arms, there was a tenderness here, a tangible love, and John didn't know where to begin. Rebecca? The words of her lullaby ceased. However, quiet humming followed. Rebecca? Her eyes focused on the outside view while her arms persisted in their steady rocking of the empty bundle. John rocked on his heels and said her name again. When nothing changed, he took a step back and stared at the cream wall. Cream curtains discreetly framed the window where Rebecca stood. On her left, a standard twin bed, neatly made with a green flannel blanket tucked at the corners. Against the east wall was the desk-like table. Shall we sit? His tone was far more hopeful than he felt. Still, he proceeded over to the desk and studied the contents that decorated her table. A framed black and white photograph, a young couple, a wedding gown, a tuxedo that hinted at a 1960s time frame. Next to it were a few stacked books. The Holy Bible, The Life and Times of Michelangelo, A History of Watercolors, Skyview High School Yearbook, 1954 to 55. And there on the desk, wide open, was a dark green leather journal. Next to the journal were 4x6 note cards. Some were plain white, with no markings. Others were marked with a date and an entry of phrases, just like what John saw before him from the open journal pages. In fact, as he looked closer, he saw one in progress. The pen set down mid-phrase from that which stared back from the journal page. The penmanship was different. The note card contained the flowery script of a young hand. The journal script was tight and slanted. What are you working on here? He spoke the words casually over his shoulder, and when there was no reply, his eyes turned back and skimmed down the journal page. October 28th, 1981. I feel trapped in this home. Must get out. Becca looks more like Mia every passing day. Must get out. She'd never understand. Rick came by today. Talked for hours. Finally, someone who I can talk with. Keep close at hand. I'm leaving tomorrow. Someone's journal? He said into the silence. Another note card, filled with the flowery script, stared back at him, capturing events from over 2 decades ago. July 4th, 1973. The flight to Germany is delayed. Crowded airports tire me. It's a holiday. Why are people here? Little Becca could not understand why. Me leaving before the fireworks. She cried. Why must she be like this? I had to go. leave before the crowds. Yet I'm stuck here to wait. Whose journal is this? He said softly. Sleep, little one, sleep on. Her response, the lullaby shift from humming to lyrics, caused him to spin around and try again. Rebecca, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Over here. You're safe here, no worries. Her back was to him, her body swaying to her soothing sounds. He glanced back at the desk. His finger touched the corner of a hidden card, letting it slide slowly out, exposing the date, followed by one line. December 7th, 1983. I need a way out. Sleep on, sleep on. Her voice, louder in tone, caused John's heart to race. Quickly, he slid the note card back into place. Drawing his shoulders back, he joined her at the window. She was back humming again, rocking steadily, her humming almost to a whisper. Outside, beyond the small creek, huge pines sloped down the cascading mountain. The large sky, endless in color, stretched forward. Far above, the sun cast a commanding glow with shadows below obeying. Pulled into the mesmerizing view, John watched some passing clouds taunt the sun's power as they covered the light rays, obscuring Clearcreek's grounds. Yet the triumph was short. Strands of light fought for freedom, forcing the clouds away, again illuminating the grounds with color. It's beautiful here, isn't it? He said, turning away from the entrancing scene to look at her. You must have the best view. She made no reply. Rebecca, I hear you prefer to stay in your room, but sometimes mixing up our routines helps, teaches us flexibility, so I thought we could head on over to the common room, see what's going on there before your group time. Still nothing. Would you mind putting down your baby? Nothing. Rebecca, he boldly put his hand on her shoulder. Please, come with me. She pulled herself free. Don't touch. Finally, a response. John felt relief due to his small victory. I won't, he said, stepping a foot away, expanding the space between them. Just lay your baby here on the bed. Then we can go for a walk down the hall. She shook her head, her body still facing the window. Come on. I'm your new doctor and I want to get to know you a little better. Ask you a few questions. He stepped forward, removing the space he had given her. If you just want to set your baby, his hand pointed at it. No, she twisted, staring directly at him. Don't touch him. Her green eyes were wild, alert. You will leave us alone.